Welcome back, everyone. We have a slightly different format today. We had all the episodes that were like deep dives into the conversations, and now we have like spitballing a whole bunch of the ideas that you gave us. So this is Trinity from Hackman Hall Religion, and then we have Ben here from the business department, so third floor Brock, here inside of our building. Welcome. It's good to have you. All right, I'm gonna pick a random one out of this.
Don't look too hard.
Oh my goodness, this one's unfolded. It's meant for us. All right, abortion among college students.
Honestly, I don't think that many abortions happen among college students. At least not with people. I shouldn't say people I know.
Well,
I honestly don't think a lot of abortions happen among college students.
I don't think now, especially after Roe v. Wade has been overturned, that it's legally happening.
Yeah. I would actually counter that, and I would disagree. I feel as though I've seen like a good majority of all my friends who more specifically are Adventists and go to an Adventist institution. They do have, I would say, I mean, I don't know statistically if this is correct, but higher abortion percentages than, because more so of the...
Is there more of a stigma, do you think, within the Christian community with it?
I would say so.
Yeah.
I would say the abstinence-only teaching kind of promotes that.
Yeah.
As far as like observation goes, there was a rumor going around for a while before Roe v. Wade was overturned that Christian schools in our area were disproportionately higher in abortion rates than non-Christian schools in our area. And that's proportionally, so it means like 1 to 10,
right.
10 to 1,000 kind of, or 10 to 100, I don't know, proportions, however they work. But what do we do with that?
And honestly, it's possible that that's true. Just using a little logic here, I think if a girl got an abortion, she wouldn't tell me. She might tell Gianna, she might tell Trinity. I'm not going to be in the loop, so that's a valid perspective.
I mean, yeah, I can think of like the pressure that I can assume the pressure that I think a lot of the girls are facing, because who wants a kid in college, on top of the fact that I don't know if you guys know, but I didn't know this until much later, but we actually, in our terms and conditions when we came here to Southern, technically they have the rights for expulsion for us if they find out that we've been sexually active, because it's against what we believe as a Seventh-day Adventist organization.
Wow. So
there are a lot of different things that I think would besides parental inclusion and besides academics and besides finances, like that's actually, because it's something that as a Seventh-day Adventist organization we believe, that is technically grounds for expulsion.
What if you're married? Because otherwise I'm screwed.
Okay.
So the idea is it's outside of marriage.
Oh, unbelievable.
Okay.
I don't know the rules. I don't know the rules.
The idea is outside of marriage.
Gotcha.
And so like a lot of these things are happening outside of marriage. And so I think so. It'd be terrifying.
Yeah, okay, I find that so interesting that there's actually like a potential expulsion for somebody who they, find out has been sexually active. I feel as though that's something that Southern kind of, I mean, I'm not so sure how much like I can counter that, but like I feel like that's a bit harsh, but also it probably would more so promote the, abortion rates as well as, women being so ashamed of like this fact that would drive them to do something that otherwise they never would.
And keep in mind, Southern doesn't say that you will be expelled, but it is grounds for.
That's an important.
Wow.
And that's something important to mind. But I think overall it is a scary fact, and I kind of keep in mind the fact of like there's a new culture. When you're thinking about it biblically, because theology. When you're thinking about it biblically, the idea of like Paul literally says it's better to get married than to burn with lust. And whether we like to acknowledge it or not, pornography, sexuality, and all of that fun stuff is a huge deal amongst our generation. And I think the culture that this is my own personal little theory, so prefer to.
No, please.
No.
We're all going in for a while.
Yeah. No, you can come back me on
in.
this. But I think that there's something really interesting that I think has happened. There's a culture of work and a timeline that's been set over time. This idea of like you have preschool, you have kindergarten, you have elementary school, you have middle school, you have high school, you have college, and then you have potentially grad school, PhD, maybe get married somewhere in the middle, and then have kids. which is kind of interesting if you compare that to the cycle that we experience on a psychological and scientific level, because the hormones are raging and like all of that fun stuff is happening kind of when we're younger.
Wow,
That's a good point.
This is
And I
such a
think
good
it's
point.
really, really interesting because when you put those two things together, a lot of the things, number one, that was happening, like the disciples were not as old as we like to say that they were, which is kind of interesting. So like Paul is probably speaking from personal experience.
Wow.
And so I think it's really interesting that I just think it's really, really, I'm not saying that Satan has done this, but I'm also not saying that he hasn't done this. But there is exponentially more room for temptation for sex outside of marriage because of this stress of like you're getting married later. Because if you think back, people were getting married a lot younger back in the olden days.
Much younger.
Granted, I do not condone the fact that a 12-year-old should be marrying some 30-year-old man.
Absolutely not.
I don't really mess with that. But yeah,
Don't clip
Good
it.
clarification.
I just want to say that. But I just think it's a cool little idea to think on.
It looks staged. We swear it's
Death
not.
penalty.
Yikes. Death penalty.
Ooh, this is a heavy one.
This is a heavy one. Now, for me personally, and this is obviously just my opinion, I think that the judicial system that we have has proven itself over time to be one of the best systems, if not the best system that we've ever had. When it seems beyond reasonable doubt that somebody has murdered multiple people, the choice we have is either we can keep them alive and we, the taxpayers, give them warm showers, or we can make a different decision. And I wouldn't fault anyone for taking the other side, but personally, I think overall, the death penalty is reasonable as currently used.
Okay. I definitely think I agree with some of the things you're saying, but I definitely also have some strong disagreements. The first thing that I think, as we're going through the list of things that you said, that I recognize that the judicial system has done some great things, but I also recognize they've done some pretty not nice things. And as far as it goes as like if it's one of the best institutions, like for example, the Douglas shooter who shot up all those kids on February 14th a couple years ago is still alive. And it bothers me every day. I have personal friends, I'm from Florida, who have personal friends who went to that school and who couldn't sleep for months.
So that's very personal.
So
for
it's
you.
very personal to me. So I'm not gonna act like I don't have, the Lord's working on my heart, but that I don't have some very strong emotions about his life still. Yeah, I know, Lord, okay. But in the same, are you guys familiar with George Stinley Jr.?
I'm not.
So back in the 1900s or the 20th century, he was the youngest person to ever be executed. And it was actually found that he was wrongly executed. He was so small that they had to put telephone books up so that they could electrocute him to kill him. I think he was 11 or 12 years old.
Yikes.
He was a black boy committed with the charge of 2 murders of 2 white girls. And I think these are the kinds of cases where I think the death penalty gets a little bit more tricky because when we're wrong, because we're human, you've killed someone.
Yeah.
And do you have the audacity and the guts to say, oh yeah, that's my fault, but there's nothing you can do to reprimand or to make restitution for a life that's gone. Wow. This kid was 12 years old and they decided back in 2014 because somebody looked at his case and was like, yo, this doesn't make sense. That plank was too big for an 11-year-old boy to carry. And they found out that no, that kid could not have killed those 2 girls.
Wow.
And he was already dead. Now, granted, that also has race to play into it, but I think that is something to really, really keep in mind when we're talking about the judicial system because it has failed a lot of people, and it's also vindicated a lot of people. But I think when the death penalty comes into play, something that is really important to keep in mind is that it's irreversible.
So Trinity, when I hear what you were saying, you bring up the fact that he was a black boy, and I think a lot of times what people do is they add a race to the conversation to put more meat behind their argument. I'm not accusing you of race baiting per se, but what I will say is that when we're looking at such a broad issue, all we can really do for purposes of conversation is play the overall numbers. Obviously, it's a case-by-case basis. We don't just have a rule, if you kill somebody, you get killed. There's more nuance to the conversation than that. However, you mentioned that there was a child whose life was cut short by the fact that he was wrongfully deemed to be guilty. And to that I say, how many children are not getting the opportunities that they could be getting because taxpayer dollars that could go to their school are going to keeping somebody alive who maybe shouldn't be?
I have a couple things to say to that. That's also assuming that taxpayer dollars are going where who should be going.
And
which
that's a whole different
that's a
conversation,
whole nother
too.
thing. And I think in the same way that you can't turn off the fact that you're black is the same way that you can't separate things when it comes to race, because those kids died because of their race. And so as much as it would be great, and I'm not trying to rile people up, definitely not, but as great as it would be to be able to say, wow, take the race out of the equation and that happens, that is a variable that played a part in the experiment. In the same way that when it comes to, we don't want to play with outliers or extremes, but the idea is those extremes and outliers still happen. And so as unfortunate it is, but in order to balance it equally and to look at things from a genuine and real level that affects people who are making these decisions, you have to incorporate all the variables that are being put in place.
Okay, guys. College tuition.
Oh my word. Okay.
Trin has thoughts. Trin has thoughts.
We're
College
listening.
tuition, bro. When it comes to tuition, I think one of the things is we always talk about how like we want to continue to propagate like Adventist children, but then it's like you're putting all your children in debt who can't pay for Adventist tuition.
Wow.
I mean, so I'm a single parent household, but my mom makes a decent amount of money. Like my mom she's kind of like the go-to powerhouse woman who's like, even if a man leaves you, you better have enough to make it on your own when they're gone. Like you don't need to be like, so I think that's probably the reason why me and my sister are the way we are. And so I don't qualify for a lot of FAFSA. I do not, but my mother is a single parent. And so it's low-key really hard. Like I think I qualify for like, I think it's like $2,500 like dollars of FAFSA.
That's it.
So I worked my butt off in high school to get as many, I think I get 12 grand off, or maybe 12 to 14 to 16, one of those numbers. And I worked my butt off in high school to get those scholarships, but it's like, tuition is really expensive. And when you think of the fact that like that all it does is accumulate, and the fact that my mom was like, we were applying for loans the other day, and she was like, Trinity, just apply for loans. Like, there's only like 2% APR. And I was like, we are not in the 60s anymore. And 2% APR has not existed for a very long time. She was like, Trinity, oh my word, it's like 14. And I was like, yeah, that is the difference.
Wake up. No disrespect to your mom, of course.
She's a sweet, lovely lady. She's just definitely from the mid-19th century. I mean, that's 19th, 20th century?
20th century.
Yeah.
She's not 150.
Your mom after the show to make
I love you, Mom.
Yeah. I apologize, Triniti's mom.
like Christian education, because it's not just Adventist church, like Christian or like private school. That's probably what I should say. Institutions are probably a little bit too expensive. Is it justified?
You know, I would say, because I pay my tuition too. I don't like how much money I have to spend to go to Southern. But if I'm being honest with myself in 2022, college is not the only option that you have to be successful as a professional anymore. The reason I'm at Southern is because I'm paying for an experience. I get to, meet Aaron Patterson, meet Gianna, meet Triniti. I get to
Get over here.
I get to hang out on campus, right? I get to be on Ignite.
Right, nice.
I don't get those experiences if I'm just online taking some classes back at home. I could get my degree at home taking classes online, or let's say I don't want a degree at all. I can go outside, I can learn to be an electrician without going to school. There's so many jobs I can do and do very well that don't require me to go to college. College is a choice. If you choose to pay that tuition, I'm not gonna cry for you. I love this one. Transgender athletes. What do you got?
Girls got thoughts.
Right.
Bro.
Next person who throws it back in.
Oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
okay.
I am not gonna.
I
Okay, there are certain things that I just feel like I don't have a say in. I don't have a say in this, and so I really struggle with this one because I know where we stand as a whole, and I know as a whole institution. But I also am the type of person, I never want to be disrespectful to someone. That's not the way that I think I've been raised. I don't think that's Christ-like. And I like to be I like to be a portrayal of actual active love. And so I like to say that because when people are like, oh, Trini, you just can't focus on love. Like, love is a really important thing, and I think we have softened its meaning. But yeah, so I am not gonna lie, I would prefer to keep my mouth shut on this topic because I don't think that I can speak on behalf of the voices effectively on either side. And I don't think I pride myself in knowing myself both sides on most all topics, and I don't know enough about both sides of this. Besides, I also have trouble saying that men are inherently stronger. And it's not my favorite
maybe they're not stronger
sentence.
than you.
Like, come on. As I say this to Big Ben. But yeah, so anybody else, please.
Aaron, Gianna?
Okay, I think running off of that, just to like also keep my mouth shut on this topic because I truly do not know enough to like back a stance either, like in either perspective. However, I would say as Christians, like our biggest principle is love, like loving, I mean, those around us, like, and treating others as we would like to be treated like ourselves. And I feel like just being a Christian means loving and supporting and encouraging those around us. And I feel like, hey, if you're transgender and you want to go, you know, compete in like the athletics, like I don't see a respective avenue to kind of disengage them from being able to pursue their passion. Yeah, I mean, I feel like just bottom line, treat everybody the way you want to be treated and love those around you.
Let me ask both of you a question. All right. Have either of you played sports at all growing up in your life?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Why are men and women's sports separated?
I know
I'll let
why
Trin
they're
take these.
Look, I know why they're separated.
Okay. If you know why they're separated, then what we also have to acknowledge is that anyone who's born biologically a male and goes through puberty as a male, their bone structure, their muscles, their tendons develop as a male. You transplant that person from men's sports into women's sports, and now they're taking the scholarships that biological females who have worked harder deserve. Look at track and field right now, and I'm not even going to go into the Leah Thomas example because we've all heard of that. But lots of track and field scholarships in universities that were traditionally going to women are going to transgender women because the gap can't be closed by training science at this point. Male puberty and female puberty are not the same. And again, I think everyone agrees with me, to be quite frank, because I don't hear people clamoring for sports to be merged and women and men to compete together because we understand that they're not the same.
Even though I've always wanted to play football, but people told me I couldn't. I think I would have wrecked some boys personally.
I back her in that statement. She definitely could.
Guys.
Me, absolutely not. Trin, absolutely. She totally
Guys,
could.
I am known for my mild aggressiveness in the sport.
Actually, yeah, I played
Mild
football
serious
with Trin. Trin's a beast. Trin could take
Were you on the
anybody
same
that comes in her direction. We were on the same
Okay.
team.
Can I ask a question
What's
getting
up?
into this? So, why do people tend to be so concerned about protecting the 1% or however many transgender women who are playing sports and not concerned about protecting the 99%? Because I never hear that conversation approached, and to me that's very curious. If I had a daughter, I would be furious if she worked hard for 4 years and a biological male took her spot on the college track team.
I wish that I had like a substantive like perspective, like based in facts and stats,
here's
so
the
that I could
thing.
like rush up to the surface.
Only reason I'm not talking is because I don't feel like I have a place to speak. My inherent gut is to feel similarly. It would frustrate me a lot if my daughter worked every day of her life to do you know,
Yeah.
Okay.
be the best in
Yeah.
that spot, and then it didn't work out. But I also am a huge proponent of loving people and accepting them for who they are. This is one of those that, you know, it's like, I don't really want to talk about it because I don't want to ruffle feathers.
And I'll say one more thing, because I appreciate all you guys' focus on love. 1 Corinthians 13 is my favorite chapter in the Bible, and that's exactly what it says. If we're not love, we're nothing. And as far as knowing like the specific data and science on it, the United States Powerlifting Association has an article that you can easily find online that explains in detail what I was trying to say. So you don't have to take my word for it.
LGBTQ plus and Christianity.
Wow, that's a nice segue.
That is a nice segue. Perfect segue, actually.
All right, Trinity, what do you got?
As the theology major, I will say my own personal opinions about it first. I personally get annoyed of how much this gets brought up because I think there's other issues to be addressed. I think I had a teacher, not a teacher, it was an evangelistic series it was called EC3 that they make theology students go to. And one of the teachers said that the Bible is no longer a source of authority that you can throw at the world's face anymore. Because we live in a secular world, whether we like to admit it or not. And so you have to come with more than just the Bible said so when you do such things. And the reason why he said that was because we have historically been a church who have said one thing and then done another.
That's true.
And so, for example, you have, pastors getting on a pulpit and saying that adultery is wrong and homosexuality is wrong and all these things, and then they're molesting kids behind scenes.
Yes.
And I think that is the big thing that I think I really struggle with, is because I understand that everyone wants to have a stance on this, and I understand that teachers want to talk about this and all these kinds of things, but we also have other things that we don't talk about, and all you do is end up making kids feel like they can't come to class, they can't say things, and they can't. And I think that's just my biggest, like, that is overarching my biggest issue. And specifically when it comes to this community and how they merge, because that's what I'm seeing when I see this question, that's my issue, is that both want to hold each other accountable, and neither are doing so.
Wow.
And so that is why I think it's like, and it's funny too, because I took a class called Intro to Youth Ministry, and it actually talked about there are 70% of kids within the LGBTQ plus community who would love to be Christian. That they would have actually, and I was like, oh my word, if they felt safe. And I think it's crazy because then you have things like conversion therapy that we have created, which
We have thoughts on that.
Go off,
Is that in the bucket?
Child.
Let's dive into that one next.
All right.
And so like, and you have like so much religious trauma that we like to ignore and act like didn't happen. And so once again, I know we like to throw this verse around like it's not, but I really can't cast the first stone because I personally, I have things because I'm going to be held accountable until I want to talk about somebody else, I better have my own act together.
Wow.
I think one of the problems that we have, and Trinity, you alluded to this, is that a lot of times the way the LGBTQ community is presented by the church, they act like that's the one sin where you're much worse than everyone else. And these other sins, these are okay. You can gossip, you can cheat on your wife, you can do all this other stuff. But if you're gay, you're going to hell. That's it, right? And that's not what the Bible presents on the issue. The Bible, I'm not going to try to go too deep into the theology. That's Trinity's job. I will say, however, one concern that I have at this point is that the Bible seems to be very, very clear on its stance on homosexuality. I don't make the rules. I don't understand why the Bible says what it says, but its wording is quite clear. And so I think in the same way that we're willing to welcome people into the church who don't take care of their bodies or are rude to their children, we need to be willing to welcome those people into the church in the same way. But at the same time, just as we don't encourage people, oh, it's okay, you don't have to be nice to your wife, we don't have to say it's okay for you to do what the Bible says. So, we shouldn't.
I hear you, and I think it's a good point. Although I think this was maybe 2 years ago, Ted Wilson, the president of the North American, or the entire Adventist Church, he tweeted something, and it was like, God loves the prostitutes, the blah, 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 the homosexuals. And like it was a huge thing in the LGBTQ plus community because that's not how they're thinking. They're not thinking, oh, this is my baggage. I'm not taking care, I'm equivalent to not taking care of my body, or I'm equivalent to the sins of the prostitute. They want to come in, be themselves, come into the church.
Interrupt you right there?
Yeah, go ahead.
See, and this is something I struggle with immensely. Like I'm anxiously looking forward to what conversations I have with people when they see this episode. But Paul uses all those things together in the same verse. He says people who disrespect their parents, people who steal, people who worship idols, and homosexuals. That's what the verse says. Again, I don't make the rules. I don't think those things seem like the same thing. But what I can't do is say something different than what the Bible says. That was good.
Gun control.
Before we get off too far into it, my perfect world has no guns in it. My perfect world has no guns in it.
I stand by that.
Perfect world has no weapons in it, period.
Period.
The argument that goes out a lot of the time is, well, we can just kind of take away the guns. I find myself often subscribing to the idea that people who want to do bad things are going to do bad things, unless someone intervenes. But when you take away guns off the market, though I believe there should be stronger screening, when you take guns off the market, people who want to find guns, just like people who want to find illegal drugs, will oftentimes be able to find those things. So that's sort of my stance, and I know we'll be talking about it more, but I want to get it out there.
Trinity, or should I go?
I can go. I think I am kind of along the lines of I am not one to kind of get into like people's morality and like what they're gonna do. I'm like, God made them who they are. Anyways, that's a whole nother thing. But I do recognize that when the amendment was made, we were talking about muskets that took how many minutes to reload? And now we have automatic rifles that can pile off how many bullets in a matter of seconds? And so I think that's, as our guns have changed, I think also, does that make sense? Because personally, if everybody's walking around with a musket, I also wouldn't mind that. I got at least 2 minutes to run away and hide before they try to shoot me again. Now, if it's a rifle, not a rifle, no, I meant a rifle.
Semi-automatic.
Like a semi-automatic, I have much less time. It went from 2 minutes to 0.2 seconds. Wow. And so I think that's what I like to mention to people when we talk about these things, because I'm not trying to tell you what to do and to take away your guns. That's not that's stepping into your house. I don't got time for that, even though we technically do have the quartering, the squattering, the amendment. Anyways, I thought it was really funny. Yeah, I think that's one of the really important things of when we're talking about, let me keep my guns, keep in mind the guns that they were talking about were not the ones that we have today. And I think that is just a really important thing to weigh into the conversation. Yeah.
I think that when we're looking at criminals in the community who may be coming to, say, rob a house armed, those criminals are going to be much more hesitant to try to open the window if they know that I can empty a ton of rounds into them in less time than it takes them to look up, right? So I hope I'm never in a situation where I have to do that. However, again, let's put the dad Ben hat on. If I have a family inside the house that I need to protect, I would feel really irresponsible knowing that somebody can come and take me out in seconds, and all I could do is hope that they miss.
Here's our next topic. We have Christians in combat.
We planned this well, guys.
These are perfectly lining up with one to the next.
Okay, actually, can I go first on this one?
Please go ahead.
So the Lord has been working me through this. And I came actually to this on accident. So number one, I've always been told that the commandment, thou shalt not kill, is actually incorrectly translated. So thou shalt not murder. Which are two different things. And I always think that's really, really interesting is when it comes to the story of David. David, we know as what? A murderer and adulterer, right? So one of the things that in 1 Samuel 21, it's talking about how David runs away from Saul and runs to the king of Gath, Abimelech, I can never say his name. And he turns crazy and whatever and all this fun stuff. And what they say about David, and the only reason I bring up the story is because when they recognize that it's David, they say, isn't that the guy David? Where they say Saul kills 1,000 and David kills 10,000s? I find it very interesting that they recognize David has killed people, okay? Wow. Want to pause that right there. But when we move back to the story of Bathsheba, we consider David a murderer because of a murder that happened that he never touched a person.
Wow. David gets on battle, kills a bunch of people, we call that. But then you have the murder that actually happens that we consider murder, that God considers murder, that we condemn. It's when he sends Bathsheba's husband to the front lines and actually never touches this man. Wow. And I think that is something that's really, really important. If you have trouble distinguishing the two, I think that's what's really important. You can never touch someone, and that's still murder. So when it comes to Christians in combat, it's not an easy thing. It is not, and none of these topics are easy. And if you want to act like these are questions and these topics are black and white, you need to look in the mirror really hard. Because it's never that easy. Wow. And as we're approaching these things, Christians in combat, I have a really, really, really soft spot for, because the guy who's kind of stepped in as my stepdad works in the military. He's a pharmacist, so he doesn't actually, but he was stationed in Afghanistan during COVID actually, and a whole bunch of stuff. And I think to act like killing is an easy thing is one thing, and I also think to act like everyone who's in the military that claims to be Christian is another thing. Because
both great points.
You can't just be either side is black and white, because number one, we have a lot of Christians who say Christian then do things that are not very Christian-like. But I also would like to recognize that somebody is a Christian and they believe that God and values life. Going into combat is not an easy thing. And I never want to make it out like it was. Yeah. But I also recognize that when David sent what's-his-name to the front of the line, he was very much so hoping that man would be dead. Wow. That was very intentional. And so these are things that are not easy. And we have Saul, who literally, why was Saul rejected as the chosen one? Because he didn't kill every single person. Wow. That is why God was like, yo, you're no longer my person.
And God's the one that said that. Isn't that crazy?
Exactly. Wow. And so I think, and granted, we know, when you look into it, it's because Saul wanted to be a little hooty-hoo and walk this man around the thingy and be like, look what I did.
Just being Saul.
And so I just like, but I think these are really important things to look at. And I think the Bible gives some really cool and insightful stories because like, I'm not saying killing is right. I'm not saying war is right at all, bro. Because the reason why we, as a Christian organization, say that, oh, abortion is wrong is because we value life. Yeah. Now, when we put in a legislature whole thing, that's a whole nother thing. But we believe that God is our moral compass, and our moral compass tells us that killing is wrong. And so in that grounds, we make all of our decisions. And I think that is what's really, really important. So when a Christian goes into combat, their goal should not be to kill people.
Thank you so much, Big Ben, for joining us. Our new co-host, Gianna, it was a great season. Thank you. And Trinity, where can we find your podcast?
Great question. So, Big Conversations Podcast on Instagram. Check it out.
And Trinity, your Instagram?
It's Triniti Ev. I live.
Perfect. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on @IgniteSAU and have happy holidays.
And remember,
happy holidays.
Yes, have a happy holiday.
Happy holidays. Ignite is doing big things. Shout out to Aarron and Gianna for having both of us on here. And guys, if you're not watching the full episodes that Ignite is doing, you need to go watch them. Check it out. And if you don't blow up the comments, we have a problem.